Today, on the wonderful Deep Spirituality podcast, we have the pleasure of scientist, genius, Cal graduate alumni, former nanotech company worker, and all-around top-flight software engineer Sean Kiluk joining us because he's got to keep me straight on science. And Mike Query will be guiding us through several questions to make sure that we review some of the content from the chemistry lab, and we're going to hit the Best Life series as well. So if you're out there driving in your car, about to do laundry, or even if you're about to fall asleep, hit that button and play the podcast. Just let it play on. Play it in your house. Play it in your kitchen. Play it in your bedroom. Play it in your car. Leave it on. Just let it go. YouTube likes that. And that way we'll be able to get to everybody in the world so that they can find out how accessible spirituality can be and how much God can transform their lives, whether they go to church or they don't go to church. Thank you for listening. And now here's Mike Query to lead us into the forest of the four dimensions.
Here we are, here with Russ and Sean. And, we've been doing the chemistry lab for about 6 weeks now. I think we've all been learning a lot. So, Russ, one of the things that you've talked to us about is going from insight to experience. So we're excited to ask you some questions today to help us and the readers sort of process the things we've been learning and start turning it into experiences that are going to transform our walk with God. So we got some questions lined up today. We thought we could use that for our conversation. It covers the span of everything that's been covered in those 6 issues so far. So if that sounds good, we'll jump in. Yep. All right. So the first question is, starting out with talking about the mindset of spiritual discovery. This is one of the big themes that you introduced in the series. So I want to start with a couple of scriptures. Proverbs 25, verse 2. It says, and this is in the Message version, it says, God delights in concealing things. Scientists delight in discovering things. And then in 1 Chronicles 12, verse 32, it says, from Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. And so, the idea of spiritual discovery comes up a lot in the chemistry lab. The desire for discovering things when you were a kid. You shared about getting that chemistry lab kit when you were a kid. And, in our conversations, we've noticed that you have a mindset of being willing to question things, discover things, look at the world and ask questions. And you don't feel like you have to have all the answers, right? It makes you willing to look at what's going on in the world, ask spiritual questions instead of ignoring it. Or resigning to it or getting angry, right? So just a question to kick things off with that in mind is, how do we develop that mindset of discovery in our relationship with God? I think that's something on the team we've been talking about. How do we kind of go from whatever background we have and looking at the Bible, approaching Christianity, and kind of bringing that spirit of discovery into our relationship with God?
Yeah, well, I'm happy that Sean's joining us today, Mike, because Sean actually studied chemical engineering. I started out to be a chemist, and Sean actually went to school and did it, or did close to it. I was just showing you guys before we got on camera my book in the back there about the art of learning and about learning in science and engineering. And we were going through it, looking at the equations. And the first thing I really want to do is I want to get to your question. You may have to remind me of it because I might forget it.
Right. Yeah,
the first thing I want to do is I want to explain to people why the chemistry lab. And I know I wrote it, but a lot of people haven't read the chemistry lab newsletters yet, and some people are behind because they're long, and I want to be able to explain some of that. And the best way to explain it is to get Sean in the conversation in a minute. But before I do that, for for those who, when it comes to the Bible, they go, wait a second, the Bible doesn't say scientist in Proverbs 25:2. That's true. The Message is the Bible, and it does say that, but the Message is an interpretive translation, which means that in translator of it is trying to give us an emotional sense of what it's communicating. It says kings in most translations. Now, depending on how you look at it, and you look at kings historically, I do think kings obviously were generally some of the most well-educated people, but there was an aspect of discovery. If you're going to build a nation, if you're going to grow it, if you look at Egypt historically and the pyramids, which is a well-known thing, that is a marvel. Pyramids and the ability they had to build those at that time. So I think what we want to do is understand that people who led in ideas and thinking, people who were building, they had to have a sense of discovery about them, and that God, I think, says he delights in sharing things. I think God has put the world here to be discovered, and I'm working on a new chemistry lab newsletter right now, And one of the things I'm trying to learn about is what is the connection with science and faith, or science and religion. And I think one of them is that that science allows us to discover the spiritual world. And I think spirituality allows us holistically to see not just the physical world, but to see all of life and all of the world, and put it all together. You might say that science tells us how things work, and spirituality tells us why of all the working. Like, why are we here? What are we supposed to do with our lives? How does it have meaning, and how does it have purpose? But I want to come back around because I enjoyed, and I didn't take as many as Sean, I enjoyed chemistry, but I enjoyed science. And I think some people go, this is boring. I get it. But when you think about Silicon Valley, and you think about all the things we use today, the smartphones we have, the smart cars we have, the EVs, all that comes from innovation. And in my mind, when you look at history, the most innovative aspects of history are where scientists were involved. And you have to understand, if you go back in history, that philosophy, natural philosophy, is connected to science. So science in its origins was about figuring things out and trying to discover. And it included the meaning of life. I mean, you got to go back to Plato and Aristotle, and I'm sure some people are like, their eyes are rolling back in their heads, and I get it. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's super exciting, but neither are some of the list of names in the Bible. They're not super exciting either, and we have to be willing to entertain it. And so, what I'm trying to do with the chemistry lab is get us to be engaged with thoughts and ideas that don't come up at church, and to make the institution of church relatable to the 80-some% of people who really want spirituality but aren't sure they want church, who believe there's God or a higher power but don't necessarily believe in church. And Deep Spirituality is built for that. The Best Life series is a practical series to help people build their lives. Not everything we're doing is for our church or for churches in general. It's for people. And we're trying to figure it out. And so I appreciate everybody's patience with the length of some of these things, the complexity of some of it. And I'm not saying it's complex because I know a lot. I'm saying it's complex because I'm trying to figure it out, and I may not have figured it out. And there are things I'm trying to unravel for myself. And everything I'm talking about are things that I'm working on. But I think it can be fun. And Sean and I had a conversation about it. And I just want to go over to Sean and say, Sean, maybe you can tell people a little bit about why using some of these metaphors can open our eyes and open our minds to think about the Bible differently, and then make it exciting, and then maybe give it a chance. Because I don't know. I just think science is fun.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me about that. I'm definitely a science is fun and engineering off the top there.
I think I'm in the wrong podcast.
That's our goal.
I'll see myself out.
No, but I think what stands out to me, even when you're talking and when we were talking earlier, was the idea of discovery and innovation. Because I don't know, growing up for me, the Bible, church was not. I did not equate innovation and discovery with the Bible. It was kind of even the language that is used about it. And so it actually was not very appealing to me. But from an early age, I mean, science and, engineering, what can we do with it was always something like, what are we going to discover? What's something we can invent? I remember for me, experiments. I had my own experiments, Russ. I didn't have the chem lab. I just my first one was like the bubble, the bubble wrap stuff. I used to think that was like the coolest thing, like you could pop it. And I'm like, well, what happens if you light it on fire? Like, would it pop? I thought it'd be like fireworks. So I did that at my first experiment, 5th grade. I remember that's
a natural next question to ask for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, I did that. I was in my room and I remember trying to be safe, put a little book down, and I lit it on fire, and it doesn't pop. Just so you know, it drips fire everywhere, and carpet is very flammable. I learned that very lesson. And it lit.
And houses burned down, and you were homeless.
And houses burned down,
shelter.
And you get in trouble. You get in trouble when you play with fire in 5th grade. So I learned some valuable lessons.
Did you document your findings on that one?
I did. I had my lab notebook.
That's how you got it. That's how you got the cow right there. You sent that in.
I wrote that in,
They're like, get that guy.
But I do remember like when I had a shelf full of Bibles and I did not know how to approach it or had language to kind of attach to it. And I think for me, like I thought science and religion and the Bible were contradictory. Like you can't believe both, but I didn't actually have anybody to show me, and I never read for myself. So when I studied the Bible for myself for the first time, I remember kind of getting some of that discovery as people taught me kind of how to approach the Bible, and I started seeing more as in that approach of discovery. And I had to kind of think about it in new ways, and I learned that it wasn't contradictory. In fact, it actually helped. And I think reading these chemistry lab articles is kind of helping me kind of rejuvenate that part, the discovery, because I think I lost it to some degree in my own faith journey of kind of just going along with what I think is what I should be doing versus discovering new things about God, discovering new things about myself. So I actually feel a lot more inspiration about that. That's what stood out to me. But I think that part of it is like, I think we can lose, if we lose that innovation, we lose part of what I think a relationship with God's supposed to be, that I think when we just go through the motions.
And Mike, you were talking about the scripture in, what was it, First Chronicles?
Yeah. I actually I wanted to reference that and ask a follow-up question if I could for both of you guys. Because the First Chronicles 12 verse 32, it talks about men who understood the times. And I was just wondering, like, how do you guys apply kind of what you're talking about to, because in the article, Russ, you kind of talk about being willing to look at the world and ask spiritual questions, right? And I find myself, like, I read the news and I'm like, I just want to turn it off, right? I oscillate between I get angry or freaked out to just, right now I'm in ignoring phase where I'm just trying to adjust my algorithm so I don't see anything that bums me out, right? And, it's kind of been successful because somebody mentioned a headline the other day. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to know. So I don't think that's the best way to approach life. And I'm wondering, that really stood out to me, like being spiritual, understanding the times, seeing things from a spiritual perspective. So I'm wondering if that's something you guys could even speak to, or how you apply what you're talking about to the, just facing what we're facing in life.
Well, Sean, how would you define chemistry? You'll probably do a better job defining it than I would.
Yeah, I think it's how materials and I guess chemical, everything's an element, everything's built with elements and atoms. So it's how things interact with each other. It includes fluids flowing and why they do that, energy flowing from one place to another. It's how things interact from an energy point of view, from a chemical point of view. There's things can change chemical properties, so it kind of defines that and how those go about it. I mean, there's different types. You got organic chemistry, which honestly was the hardest class I took, and I didn't, just because there's so many different processes that happen, remembering those things. So it's how I'd say, I just break it down, is the interaction between chemicals in our kind of universe, but everything is a chemical.
Interaction with elements, atoms, and everything. So here's why that's important. Let's say you look at the world today, and probably one of the things that causes people that I talk to the most stress is the political environment in America. And everybody's probably waiting for me to make a political statement. I'm not going to make a political statement. What I'm going to tell you is that's chemistry. When I took my first political science course, because I started college being political science major, then went to econ, and then when I became a Christian, decided to go in the ministry, I went to religion. But I wanted to do econ because I thought it was a combination of, how to make money and how to be political. But the professor, this was not that long, 10 years or so after Watergate. And he came in and he said, what's the definition of politics? Or what do you think of politics? And we all said corruption and all these different things because we all were relating to what we had seen as little kids growing up about Nixon and all that he had done. And he said, no, politics is how people work together. That's what politics is. And so when you're looking at the world and you're getting stressed out about politics, you have to see the chemistry, and spirituality allows you to understand it. And so one of the things I think that I look at in my life that's caused me a lot of challenges and a lot of grief and caused a lot of mistakes in my life is selfish ambition. When you look at the Bible and you read it, and this is actually what I'm working on the next Chemistry Lab newsletter about. When you look at the Bible and you read it, it answers the question about what corrupts the chemistry of people working together. It's selfish ambition. So when I talk about being able to look at the world from a spiritual point of view, you're able to look at people. Let's just assume people are atoms, they're elements. Get your periodic chart out of people, what kind of personalities they have. And so when you have people who are great at working with people, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I know this is going to maybe inject people with the sleep serum again, but I'm telling you right now that it is impossible to have a conversation with non-religious people if we don't familiarize ourselves with something other than pop culture events. Now, I think it's good to know who Taylor Swift is and that she just bought back all of her original music and that she is doing something that is groundbreaking for young artists, and I admire her on so many levels. I think it's incredible to listen to Anderson .Paak, who's my new favorite, and the way he puts music together and know who he is. And I think there's so many pop culture things that are important to know. But what you ought to know is that FDR was one of the best people at working with the chemistry of people. And that's why during the Depression and World War II, he was able to lead the country successfully. Abraham Lincoln, another masterful, high emotional intelligence leader who knew how to interact with people on a level that, and we know this from Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, he selected all the guys who tried to beat him for the presidency to be his team to lead America through the Civil War. How was he able to do that? He understood the chemistry of people. He had a spiritual perspective, and I write about that, I think, in the first or second newsletter about his ambition, his particular ambition. So what does understanding the times mean? Understanding the times means our ability to look beyond what we see in the physical activity of human beings and look underneath it. What's the motive of people? So if politics is driving you crazy, instead of getting mad at the policies people are choosing, try to look and go, what's the motive behind this? Understand that every individual who leads has motives. And a lot of times in society, people say you shouldn't question anybody's motives. And that's bled its way into the church. But the reality of the matter is, to understand the times, you have to look at motives. And the first motives you have to look at, Proverbs 16, I think it's verse 2. But the bottom line is, it's saying, God says, I weigh the motives. You can do everything you want on the outside, but I'm weighing the motives. So if God thinks about that, 1 Samuel 16, I look at the heart. If God thinks about the heart and the motives, we should think about that too. And so understanding the times isn't just being able to say, oh, wow, down in Miami, they have great beaches and it's a great place to go for spring break. Understanding the times is not just like, hey, Ukraine and Russia are fighting in war. Understanding the times is not like, well, Gaza's, it's terrible and people are dying for what reason or whatever. Let's protest it. Understanding the times is going, when people don't have God and they don't have the lordship of Christ over their life, if they don't have someone they look to and says, this is the standard for truth and this is the standard for righteousness, this is the standard for justice, if they don't have that, then it becomes very difficult to tease out what's really happening. And then we get caught up into fighting for causes, being angry at people because we're not looking at it through a spiritual lens. It's interesting in the life of Jesus, 33 years of living, you don't see him involved in a single political battle, although some people would say he was fighting a political battle with the Pharisees. He wasn't really fighting a political battle with the Pharisees. He was diagnosing, if I can use a word here, prophetically what was wrong with the Pharisees' culture that they were building, that it wouldn't lead to God. And so understanding the times and seeing with the spiritual lens is getting our heart, our mind, our soul, our body aligned in a way that we can look at the world and say, I'm not going to be fooled by how people act on the outside. I'm going to understand how they're operating on the inside. And I'm also not going to be fooled by how I act on the outside. I'm going to look at the inner character of my life and make sure I'm aligning what's going on inside of me with God in a way that manifests outside is good. And so I think a lot of us will have a lot more impact on the world. We'll have a lot less stress. We'll have a lot less tension. We'll have a lot less frustration if we look with that lens at everything from business and corporations to money to housing to expense of where you live. Everything should be looked through the lens of God. And remember, God's ultimate purpose is to make our lives better. That's the long-winded answer to that question. Sorry about that.
That's why we're here, man. That's the format.
What if you could grow into the person God created you to be, one skill at a time? This episode is brought to you by The Best Life, a brand new series designed to help you develop essential life skills with God's guidance. We'll dive into 20 key areas from time management to resilience, all rooted in biblical wisdom. No matter your season of life, it's never too late to grow. Visit our website, deepspirituality.com/bestlife to start building the best life, one step at a time. Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the podcast. Your guys' encouragement, support, and engagement goes a long ways. Now, back to the podcast.
You mentioned Jesus and how he lived. I think that's a good segue to the next question here, because one of the things that you talked about a number of times, probably most of the issues, was this idea based on like how Jesus lived and what he taught and what he spoke about this idea of like the four dimensions of a whole life, right? It's a theme that's come up a lot. Mark 12, verse 28, it says, "One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, 'Of all the commandments, which is the most important?' 'The most important one,' answered Jesus, 'is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength.'" And I like to follow that by reading a line from the first edition, the first newsletter article. You said, "Jesus called us to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Four dimensions that make up a whole life. Our culture often addresses one, two, or maybe three of these. Our mental well-being may be recognized as important, along with our physical strength and health. Sometimes, but less often, our emotional needs are acknowledged and explored. But the soul is nearly always neglected. We need all four to live a whole life, so the result of neglecting even one is superficiality, a life without fullness of depth, meaning, or purpose." And so a question we had here, a discussion we want to have, for you, Russ, and obviously Sean as well, and is, how do we know which of the four dimensions we're operating in right now? And then how can I know which I need the most growth in? Because that's something for myself, and I can speak more on that. I'll let you guys share, but that's something that came up in our discussions about this, is identifying where are we at in the four dimensions, and how do we know how to grow that so that we can, work on our outlook. You
might be smarter than me on this. Why don't you tell me what you figured out? Because I don't. Okay. How do you know what dimension you're in? I'm trying to. What? What? How do you know dimension? Star Trek. That's how you know. Spock. What does Spock know about it? What are you talking about?
I can share.
Sean's smarter than me. He probably already figured this out.
Well, I can share. I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I can tell you that breaking it down those four ways is really helpful for me, and how Jesus did that. Because, for me as someone, like the mind and the physical part were things that I've actually purposely worked on in my life. Like with the mind, like studying in college or school, I kind of made myself learn some material that was difficult or boring, but I kind of pushed myself, and then physical, I can get myself to kind of, not necessarily working out, that wasn't my thing, but more like getting myself moving. Not the physical strength in that sense, but more like I just keep myself working.
Tube lifting.
Yeah, exactly. That's more but the other two, definitely weaknesses for the heart and the soul. And it's, and it actually made me think when you're sharing about knowing the times and understanding people, that we have, and you're saying that's chemistry. Because in chemistry, there's different properties of things. You got like physical properties, the melting point, boiling point. Those are things that the substance is like that themselves. It's itself, crystal structure. And then you got like the chemical properties of like how it interacts with other things. And I see these four. In our kind of language, it's somewhat helps us understand where we're at, and I can see the interaction with things. But because I didn't work on the emotional and the spiritual very much growing up, that's still a weakness now, which affects my marriage. It affects how I'm raising my son. It affects a lot of things. And I don't know if it answers your question, Mike, but I know the areas that I'm weak in are the ones I want to quit on the most, with emotion, the heart. I don't want to work at that. I lean toward the things I'm strong in.
That's good.
And so
you should start writing the Chemistry Lab newsletter. You make sense. I apparently don't even understand what I write. Mike's like, what dimension are you in? I'm still wrestling with that. What dimension am I in? I'm watching his Dark Materials, and so I'm these dimensions, man. It's like Doctor Strange. You know, what dimension am I in?
That's where I was hoping I was hoping we'd go there next, like the fifth dimension.
Can you tell me what dimension you're in? I have no idea what dimension you're in.
Hey, well, I'm kind of freaking out right now. What
you're
dimension?
In the dimension of being smarter than I ever could be. I don't know what you're talking about. What dimension are you in? I'm in the Twilight Zone. That's the dimension I'm in. So the way I would answer the question would be, and I know I wrote it this way, so apologies to the readers. One, it's not meant to be that deep. So, I know I wrote it that I'm not. That's not a statement about you, Mike. That's a statement about me.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm writing, I try to have fun when I write. I try to write about things in a way that help me grow. I have a lot of things I want to be better at. I have a lot of dreams in my heart that I believe I want to see come true for my family. I want to see come true for other people. And I see a lot of limits in my life. I see limits in my talent. I see limits in my capacity to accomplish things. And so I'm always trying to ask myself the question, I should be living a limitless life. God is bigger than this. Why am I so stuck all the time? Why am I so afraid all the time? So the way I would approach this is understanding, and this may be more relatable to more of our listeners. I had a friend of mine who was a chef. And he was making all this cool stuff, and I was eating it. And I said, man, I don't know how you do this. I can't figure out how you do this. He goes, Russ, cooking is just chemistry. That's what he told me. He said, cooking is just chemistry. I said, really? He goes, yeah. And so I think part of what people have to understand is that living our life in those dimensions, and let's get that word dimension out because it's so scientific that it may be not accessible to people because very few people other than me and Sean are walking around thinking about dimensions. Well, there's a whole set of people thinking about dimensions, but I'm not going to get into it. Primarily physicists and we get into quantum computing, right, Sean? That'll really mess us up when we realize that quantum computing is going to make AI look like tricycles. But the thing that I think is important is when I was a kid, I didn't just like chemistry sets. I like chocolate cake. And I used to use, I'm an old guy, I used to use Betty Crocker. Well, my mom made the cakes and my grandmother made them from scratch. And that means she could just open the cabinet and pull out whatever ingredients were in it and she could make a cake. I didn't even know what it was. She just put her hands in there. Next thing you know, she'd send us out the yard. I used to spend summers in Tennessee where she was, and we'd pick blueberries and blackberries and raspberries and we'd bring them into her and she'd make pies. And she just saw you leave for an hour or two and you come back and you got this steaming fresh pie. My grandmother knew chemistry. She knew how to take ingredients out of the cabinet, combine them with a fruit, and all of a sudden you had the most delicious pie you ever wanted to taste, and you couldn't eat just one piece. Trust me, I was 8, 9, 10 years old during that time, couldn't eat just one piece. Heart, soul, mind, and strength is our chemistry. It's who we are. That is the makeup of every human being. And so what we're talking about is when we look at our makeup is our chemistry. It's how we function as human beings. And if any part of our chemistry is off, we're going to be off. We're going to minimize our potential. When I had those Betty Crocker cakes, I remember I had to have the cake mix, which for someone who cooks by scratch, they'd have flour, but I had the cake mix. Right. Then I had the eggs, then I had the milk. And then I was living at a time when they came out with canned frosting. So you would go to the store, you get the can, you pop that bad boy open, and the frosting was already made. So I didn't even have to make the frosting. Used to be you had to make the frosting. And so I had all my ingredients. Eggs, got that. The Betty Crocker, got that. The milk, got that. The frosting, got that. Heart, soul, mind, strength. If I didn't have the frosting, cake just ain't as good. If I didn't have the eggs, let me tell you what, that cake was going to have problems. If I didn't have the Betty Crocker, and we'll just call that flour for us scratch cookers, if I didn't have the Betty Crocker, there'd be nothing. I'd have eggs mixed with milk. What is that? What is that? You got to throw that in the skillet and make an omelet because you don't have a cake. And so the key is, I'm not trying to be complicated. I'm just saying, what's your cake like? How are you cooking your cake? What's the chemistry lab about? The chemistry lab is about how God gives us the tools to live the best life possible. But if we don't mix that bad boy carefully, thoughtfully, if we don't get help mixing it, then it's just not going to taste good. And I'll tell you what, I'll never forget, I made a yellow cake with chocolate frosting. I made that thing. Man. I was so fired up. I'm telling you, Sean, I was so fired up. But you have to let it cool, right? Got to let that thing cool. My mom taught me about this. My grandmother taught me about this. So I went downstairs, watched a little hoop on TV as a teenager. Watched a little hoop on TV, and all of a sudden I heard some noise. And I heard some banging.
Oh, no. I
ran upstairs, and our standard poodle named JT had been eating the cake.
No. Oh, that's awful. That's really bad.
You know what that tells us?
A poodle?
You know what that tells us? Oof. Dark forces can ruin our chemistry experiment. When you go through all the trouble, you got to remember all the time there are dark forces at work trying to ruin your chemistry experiment. Adversity, opposition, difficulty. And so let me put it this way. What I want everybody to get out of today's podcast is that hang in there with us. Please email us and give us your suggestions and your ideas. Many of you have. We understand that putting these in some more bite-sized types of content will help you, but you have to be patient because working on it, it really is in the lab. I'm trying to learn. I'm listening to people. I'm talking to people. I started talking to Sean and said, Sean, you got to get on this podcast. We've got some other scientists that are going to come on. We have doctors coming on. We plan to talk about everything from how medical health and spiritual health work together with some doctors. We plan to talk about eating disorders and the challenge of eating disorders and have some of that go on. Some of these will be people who don't really believe the Bible or believe in God. They'll want to come on because they believe in spirituality, and we need them because of their expertise in some areas. And so it's going to be different. And what's different about the Chemistry Lab is this is just one part of deep spirituality. I want to encourage you to go to the Best Life series. We have a number of writers, a number of people creating content. And this thing, if you have a teenager or a middle schooler, grab it, utilize it, make it a time of discussion. If you have a college student, make sure they're going to it and using it and developing some of those talents and some of those skills. And I know for me as an adult, looking at those and going, hey, I'm not particularly strong in, like I can be very organized in my mind and very disorganized physically. You know, I've got a mind-body disorientation there. And so it helps me look at the Best Life series and go, hey, here's a way to be more organized. Here's a way to be more structured. Here's a way to be more disciplined. And so I want to encourage everybody to do that. We've been working real hard on this, but I want to let you know, people like Mike, people like Amy, people like Alexis, they're doing a lot of heavy lifting to give you that content. You're going to get some different content on Fridays as well. We're going to start coming out with some more creative and useful tools that are not just pure writing. And so the podcast is part of that. You'll hear more from Mike. You'll hear more from me. You'll hear more from Sean. And I know, Mike, you've got a bunch more questions, but we're going to wrap this podcast up and we'll create some more for you that for those of you who don't, necessarily want to read all of it, we're going to get a lot of the content in here. And don't forget, Mike, don't we have we're adding some narrative reading of the podcast. The what do you call them? The Chemistry Lab, right? Tell them about that.
Yeah, you got it. So yeah, if you so you can go to deepspirituality.com, and if you go to the Chemistry Lab, you'll be able. We're going through each of the installments, and we have a narrative podcast experience, so you can actually listen to. We got Daryl Howe, fantastic audio talent, and he reads through the whole thing. So if you're someone who does better just with audio reading than visual reading, then you can listen as you go through the installments. We're working our way through, and eventually we'll hopefully catch up where they're coming out around the same time that the installments actually drop. But for now, we got the first couple live ready for you to check out, and we'll keep. You can follow us on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform. You'll get them in your feed there. You can also go to the website, deepspirituality.com, and definitely encourage you to take a listen. Sometimes it'll help your reading and just helpful to take it in a different way.
Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. And don't feel like you have to understand every single thing or relate to every single thing. There's nuggets. And please just support it. Share it with other people. Again, give us input. But remember, The Best Life series is on there, and that's got way more content than the Chemistry Lab. Please go take a look at the Best Life series. There's also a tremendous number of videos and other articles. Maybe you want to work on anxiety. Maybe you're working on relationships. We've got stuff all about that. I was just on a podcast being interviewed, and the guy was saying he was completely surprised by how much content we have on despirituality. You can go there and you can search. I like to do this every now and then. You can go and do a search, and you can find all kinds of stuff on whatever topic you want to search on, except you can't find, you can't search yet too much for like cake or anything like that. So you won't find my recipes, for Betty Crocker.
That's the new newsletter.
Yeah, that's the new newsletter.
Cooking.
Yeah,
it's coming
but
down.
hey, if you're a cook out there, if you cook, send us some stuff on cooking, and we'll include that in the Chemistry Lab. Maybe I'll even do a Chemistry Lab newsletter on cooking. That would be a devastating indictment on the crimes I've committed in the kitchen.
Better yet, send in a sample and we can eat it.
Oh wow, that's very thoughtful of you, Mike, to make sure you're being taken care of. As if you don't get enough freebies. Again, we have a great team here. Nathan, Vince, they're working on video stuff. We've got some other folks on board that are helping us. We're trying to do as much as we can to advance everyone's knowledge of spirituality, in particular in relation to God and the God of the Bible. Thank you for listening. It's been a great pleasure to be able to interact with a lot of you. Thank all of you for writing in. We had a chemical engineer write in and give us some thoughts a while back. Sean, it wasn't Sean, and it was another individual who wrote in and gave me some great things to think about. And we've had a number of people just encouraging us. Thank you for sending those notes in. They are very encouraging. Thank you for your patience as we learn how to do things and as we try to do them right. And remember, despirituality is our goal, is to make spirituality accessible to every person that's out there. And and you help us do that. And you really are our partners in this, and we need your help. Remember to like and subscribe all the podcasts. You can even take 10 minutes and go back and just like all the ones you listened to already and rate them, and maybe make a comment. Say on there, how did Sean Kiluk get on that podcast? He's from Cal. He didn't go to the University of Michigan. What's wrong with him? Or Mike was down in Santa Cruz and he was down there with Ezra Klein and he never even met him and talked to him. And now Ezra won't take his phone calls. Man. Or Russ, he's from the same state. He's from the same state of Michigan that Magic Johnson's from. But why didn't Russ grow to be 6'9"? What happened? These are the questions that keep you up at night that you can look at. But please make sure you communicate with us. Thanks a lot.